we have to stop it. Today, I'd like to share with you the 4 opening errors that millions of chess players keep playing without even realizing that they're doing it wrong, so that first of all, make sure that you don't do these errors, and secondly, you know how to take advantage of them when your opponents play those wrong opening moves. And they're extremely common on the level below 1600 rating, but of course, even higher rated opponents will often fall into these traps. So, what are the most common opening moves? I've switched over to the database of online blitz games, and here in the right bottom corner you can see the stats. The most played moves are at the top. We can see that by far the most popular move is pawn e4. It's almost twice as popular as pawn d4, so we're going for pawn e4. Black typically responds symmetrically, pawn to e5. After that, pretty much everybody goes for knight to f3, attacking the central pawn on e5, therefore black defends it by playing knight to c6, and here the 2 main moves are either bishop to c4 or bishop to b5. And even though bishop b5 is the main choice of professional players, on amateur level, most players refuse to play it because it leads to a complex strategic game, and the bishop c4 is the top choice on amateur level. Here black can go either bishop c5 or knight f6, but it often transposes into a similar position, and we're going to talk about that position precisely. For example, if black goes knight to f6. Now here black somewhat attacks this pawn on e4, and white needs to do something about that. There are a couple options, as we can see here, either knight g5, known as the right lever attack, or pawn d3 or knight c3. And so those are the positions we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to share with you the errors, once again, that millions of chess players, without exaggeration, keep playing here. Well, the first very common error here is defending this pawn on e4 by playing knight to c3. At first, you may think, what could be more natural than just playing knight c3, bringing the knight out, defending this pawn, and yet it's kinda a mistake, because it allows black for a typical tactics, which is actually worth remembering because it works in different kind of positions like that. It's knight takes e4. You're temporarily sacrificing your knight because you're going to get it back right on the next move. Here after pawn e5, it's a double attack, and therefore you're going to get one of white's pieces back, but at the same time, you establish your control in the center and you remove white's pawn from the center. Here in this position, actually most of your opponents, according to the database once again, play another wrong move, bishop takes d5. Looks like white's gonna lose one of their pieces, so white thinks, okay, at least I'm gonna get a pawn for my bishop, right? And yeah, but in that case, after queen takes d5, black gets 2 bishops advantage. They're also dominating in the center. White has nothing in the center, this knight is attacked, it's gonna go, and actually this position is already strategically winning for black. For example, if white goes knight c3, because they need to move this knight away from danger, and you just move your queen away, let's say queen e5, for example, white castles or something else, you go bishop g4, on the next move you castle queenside, and you have already this very strong pressure, right? So this bishop is putting pressure here, the knight can possibly jump on d4 and, you know, support this attack. Your pawn from f5 can also be pushed forward. After you castle queenside, your rook on the d8 is going to become very active. And so you have a lot of advantages here in this position, and white just has nothing. Therefore, this position is actually already winning for black, even though it may not seem that way, but black is having actually a winning game right now, because white was not aware of one of these common opening traps. Alright, let's move on to the common error number 2. In this position, once again, even if white is smart enough not to play knight c3 in this position, they have a lot of ways to spoil their position anyway. All in all, usually white plays either pawn d3 or knight to g5. Knight g5 is a more tactical way, and I've got another video where I covered how you can play a very interesting line against this, and it's quite unknown, therefore usually students get great results with it, so again, you may just watch that video afterwards. And today I want to focus rather on a more standard position, which is something like this, when white just plays pawn d3, and you respond, let's say, bishop c5. And again, you can get to this or similar position with slightly different move order, but very often on beginner level, that's the opening position you will face, okay? After that, let's say white will castle, black goes pawn d6. And in this position, white has a couple common moves here. Sometimes they play pawn h3 to prevent your bishop from getting out and establishing this pin. So pawn h3 is one option. Another one is bringing their own bishop to g5, trying to take advantage of that pin. They may still develop their knight to c3 right here, or they may play pawn c3. So I'd say that these 4 moves are the most played ones. Now, out of these 4 moves, 3 are kinda wrong. Can you believe that? By the way, can you spot the correct one here in this position? If you do, write it down in the comments below. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then it just means that you've came to the right place. And this video will really enlighten your opening chess knowledge. Okay, so what's the problem with these common moves? First of all, the most common move, the most played move here is pawn h3. Your opponents are aware of your intention to bring your bishop out, and they want to stop it. But it has quite a major drawback. After they play pawn h3, a very useful hint for black to remember here is not to hurry with your castling. You can postpone this decision for a little bit. You can castle anytime you want, so you don't have to do that right away. Because when your king is still in the center of the board, you have another very cool attacking plan here, which is pawn h6. And your idea here is simply to push pawn g5, pawn g4, and just open up the g file and go against white's king. This seems like just brutal, very straightforward checkmating attack, but surprisingly, it's very difficult for white to stop it. For example, white goes knight c3, you just go g5, you go boldly for your attack on the king side, and it's really difficult for white to stop it once again. White may try playing knight h2 and just play defensive. We're going to cover that in a moment. The most played move here is bishop e3. White just tries to play classical moves, try to develop their pieces, and the bishop needs to be developed. But here you just play pawn g4 happily. It attacks the knight. It also attacks this pawn, and because notice that your bishop is also out and it's ready to grab this pawn after some potential exchanges. Therefore, white is forced to trade here. And after this exchange, you're recaptured by your bishop, and actually white's position here is rather lost already. I think so. What's the problem? Well, there are two major problems for white. The first problem is this pin. Really annoying, really difficult for white to do something about that. Your knight is always ready to go to d4 and to put more pressure onto this weak knight on f3. And if white ever moves their queen away and allow you to trade here on f3, you can see how badly it's going to expose their king. So that's the problem. That's the problem number one. The problem number two is this open g file, which is against white's king, and you can always just move your rook there, and together with little other preparation, is going to create a lot of checkmating threats. And basically white is already defenseless. They usually capture here on c5. After that, you're going to recapture, obviously, and now you can attack this knight either with knight e4, the most obvious way. You can even use a more creative way of bringing your other knight through h7 to g5 and also putting pressure that way. In most cases, white plays here knight d5, the move that looks good, natural at first, but in fact it's pointless. It doesn't stop your attack in any way. You just continue with knight d4, taking advantage of this pin, threatening to capture there, and if white plays pawn c3 or basically any other move, then now you already can go for the checkmating attack. You play bishop takes f3, attack of the queen. It's defended by the knight, therefore white cannot capture it with their queen, or else it will be captured. And if pawn takes, it just opens up the king, and it's basically the end. You go rook g8 check, king has to go, and now you just move this knight away, preparing queen h4 checkmate on the next move. For example, bishop takes, queen h4. You can see that black's attack was really simple, really straightforward. You didn't sacrifice anything, you didn't calculate any complex ideas. It was just to open up the g file and go against the king. Very simple and yet very effective, and completely unclear for white how to stop that. Okay, let's go back to this position right after white played this move pawn h3, hoping that it makes their position more secure, but it turns out that it actually makes their position more vulnerable to your kingside attack after pawn h6, and you just start this brutal attack on the kingside. Now, we do know that if white allows pawn to be pushed forward to g4, it gives black a very strong attack. What if white tries to hold as hard as they can, saying, hey, I'm defending this pawn with everything that I could, and now you can't break through. But you say, hey, I'm gonna do it anyway, pawn g4. And your plan does not change at all. After pawn takes, you temporarily sacrifice this pawn, but you're gonna get it back right on the next move after rook g8. And now you have three attackers, knight, bishop, and rook, and white only has two defenders, which is knight and queen. Therefore white cannot hold on to this pawn anymore. On the next move you are gonna grab it, and the situation is not changed at all. Notice that this bishop is pinning the pawn, therefore it can never be pushed forward. Therefore that's not an option. If white plays any move here, very often they're gonna lose very badly, because again, maybe Stockfish at 3500 rated agent can defend it, but most of your pawns will lose very badly. For example, let's say they go something like knight e5, okay, or any other move. You just grab this pawn now, and after an exchange on g4, your bishop comes out, attacks the queen. Again, the pawn is still pinned, still cannot move because of your dark square bishop control on this diagonal, and white needs to do something about the queen. When it moves somewhere, you can also exploit the pin along the g-file with bishop f3 hitting this pawn on g2. You know, your queen is ready to come out, and you can easily see why your attack is devastating here. For example, if white tries pawn g3, it fails in a nice way after rook takes. Still, your bishop is playing a good role, not letting this pawn to move, and after that is check to the king, and after that it can finish very quickly. So once again, another example where white played seemingly natural move and moves all along this game and still lost the game very badly within just a couple moves. Alright, let's move on to the most common mistake number 3. In this position, if we know that h3 is kind of wrong, what if white just goes knight c3, trying to play symmetric moves, thinking that, you know, we're having a symmetric game, white is having an extra tempo because, you know, they start out the game, so looks like it should be slightly more favorable for white. But it's actually not the case, because knight c3 has another major drawback. You can now play bishop g4, establish this pin, and white's gonna suffer. And once again, you delay your castling, because we do know that in some variations you're going to push your kingside pawns forward and organize an attack that way. And for that reason, we keep our king in the center for some time. Just, you know, until we figure out whether we're going to go for that kingside brutal attack or not. Now, what's the problem for white with this pin? Since white defined the position of their knight, it's on c3, it cannot do anything about this pin anymore. When white's knight was there on b1, it could be brought to d2 and support the other knight. Also, when white's knight was still not on c3, white had an option to push the pawn forward and at least take control of this square. But now this knight is blocking the pawn, it can't move anymore, and for that reason it's very difficult for white to stop this knight d4 threat, which is going to put pressure onto this knight. And again, very simple, but also very effective, and white is quite in trouble. What they usually do here is they play pawn h3 first, trying to solve the problem in an easy way, thinking like, hey, are you going to go back? But you say, no, I'm going to keep having this pin, bishop h5. What can white do next? Well, usually they play bishop g5, trying to create a same pin themselves, but there is a very important here moment that you need to know. Generally speaking, we want to play knight d4 and break up white's pawn structure. But if you play knight d4 right away, it does not work that brilliantly, because white can play pawn g4. And, you know, it pushes your bishop back, and, you know, so the whole idea kind of fails. It's not that you're losing the game, no, the position is fine, but you don't have this attack that you wanted to have. So instead, what you do need to do is to play pawn h6 first, bring the bishop back, and now we play pawn g5. Once again, we take advantage of the fact that our king is not on the king side, and therefore we can push these pawns freely. Our king feels completely safe here. If we ever need to castle, we can always castle queenside. So pawn g5, bishop g3, and only now we bring our knight forward to d4. What's the difference? Well, because of this push of our pawns, and because we push the white's bishop back to g3, it blocks the pawn. So the g-pawn can't be brought to g4. It can't, you know, jump ahead of the bishop, right? And for that reason, g4 is not an option, and our plan succeeds. And because of this pin, because of this attack, there is nothing white can do, and yeah, basically white is losing the game right now. They often go knight d5, it doesn't change a thing. After that, you're simply gonna take it. White recaptures with the bishop. They attack this pawn, it doesn't really matter, but you can anyway push the bishop away. And after that, you can play queen f6, putting more attack against this knight, this time with the queen. And white is already defenseless. The knight can never move because it loses the queen. If not, you just grab it. For example, pawn c3, you grab this knight. After that, you recapture, you want a pawn, destroyed white's castling, queen goes away, and you can just play pawn h5 and just continue this quick attack on the king side. For example, in the game we're analyzing, white played bishop d1, black continued with his attack, g4, queen takes, and you can easily see how bad it is for white. For example, if white captures here, you can just play pawn h3 followed by queen to g2 checkmate. At this point, you may be wondering, it can't be all that bad for white. And indeed, white does not have to lose. of course. Well, the correct move for white in this position would be pawn to c3. And again, not correct like objectively, but from the practical standpoint, because now when this square is under the control and white's other knight is ready to be brought to d2 if necessary and support that one, basically black does not have a strong immediate attacking plan right here. And in that case, it just goes into a standard game of chess. A stronger player will win. But again, not many players know this. So we already know that knight c3 is kind of run, allows for the spin, very unpleasant for white. h3, kind of run again, allows black for this brutal attack on the king side. Another common error that white players play here is the move bishop g5. And maybe you can even guess what's wrong with this move. It allows you and even invites you for the similar kingside attack h6 pawn g5. And we already know that this plan is very dangerous for white. And now because white had that bishop on the king side, you got a couple extra temples for developing this kingside attack, and that's why it becomes so dangerous and so bad for white. I covered that in another video already, so I'm just gonna link it so that you can see how to follow up, and it's a really spectacular game. So in this video, I'm showing you the game played by Chigorian, a famous master of the past, where he shows you how to completely demolish white with a spectacular attack. And also, if you wish to elevate your chess level overall, you may attend my free masterclass by clicking the link over there so that you don't have to rely on just memorizing the moves that I'm sharing with you, but you can understand how to find proper moves yourself. Anyway, keep crushing it, and I'll talk to you soon.